The city is of night, perchance of death, but certainly of night. For never there can come the lucid morning's fragrant breath after the dewy dawning's cold grey air. The moon and stars may shine with scorn or pity. The sun has never visited that city, for it dissolveth in the daylight fair. Dissolveth like a dream of night away, though present in distempered gloom of thought and deadly weariness of heart all day. But when a dream night after night is brought throughout a week, and such weeks few or many recur each year for several years, can any discern that dream from real life in aught? For life is but a dream, whose shapes return, some frequently, some seldom, some by night, and some by day, some night and day. We learn, the while all change and many vanish quite, in their recurrence with recurrent images, a certain seeming order. Where this ranges, we count things real, such is memory's might. A river girds the city west and south, the main north channel of a broad lagoon, regurging with the salt tides from the mouth. Waste marshes shine and glister to the moon for leagues, then moorland black, then stony ridges. Great piers and causeways, many noble bridges, connect the town and islet suburbs strown. Upon an easy slope it lies at large, and scarcely overlaps the long curved crest which swells out 2 leagues from the river marge. A trackless wilderness rolls north and west, savannas, savage woods, enormous mountains, bleak uplands, black ravines with torrent fountains, and eastward rolls the shipless sea's unrest. The city is not ruinous, although great ruins of an unremembered past, with others of a few short years ago more sad, are found within its precincts fast. The street lamps always burn, but scarce a casement in house or palace front, from roof to basement, doth glow or gleam athwart the murk air cast. The street lamps burn amidst the baleful glooms, amidst the soundless solitudes immense of ranged mansions dark and still as tombs. The silence which benumbs or strains the sense fulfills with awe the soul's despair unweeping. Myriads of habitants are ever sleeping, or dead, or fled from nameless pestilence. Yet as in some necropolis you find perchance one mourner to 1,000 dead, so there, worn faces that look deaf and blind like tragic masks of stone, with weary tread, each wrapped in his own doom, they wander, wander, or sit fordone and desolately ponder through sleepless hours with heavy, drooping head. Mature men chiefly, few in age or youth, a woman rarely, now and then a child. A child, if here the heart turns sick with ruth to see a little one from birth defiled, or lame or blind, as preordained to languish through youthless life. Think how it bleeds with anguish to meet one erring in that homeless wild. They often murmur to themselves, they speak to one another seldom, for their woe broods maddening inwardly and scorns to wreak itself abroad. And if at whiles it grow to frenzy which must rave, none heeds the clamour, unless there waits some victim of like glamour to rave in turn, who lends attentive show. The city is of night, but not of sleep. Their sweet sleep is not for the weary brain. The pitiless hours like years and ages creep. A night seems termless hell. This dreadful strain of thought and consciousness which never ceases, or which some moment's stupor but increases, this worse than woe makes wretches there insane. They leave all hope behind who enter there. One certitude while sane they cannot leave, one anodyne for torture and despair. The certitude of death, which no reprieve can put off long, and which, divinely tender, but waits the outstretched hand to promptly render that draught whose slumber nothing can bereave. Because he seemed to walk with an intent, I followed him, who, shadow-like and frail, unswervingly, though slowly, onward went, regardless, wrapped in thought as in a veil. Thus, step for step, with lonely sounding feet, we travelled many a long, dim, silent street. At length he paused, a black mass in the gloom, a tower that merged into the heavy sky. Around, the huddled stones of grave and tomb, some old god's acre, now corruption's sty. He murmured to himself with dull despair, here faith died, poisoned by this charnel air. Then, turning to the right, went on once more, and travelled weary roads without suspense, and reached at last a low wall's open door, whose villa gleamed beyond the foliage dense. He gazed, and muttered with a hard despair, here love died, stabbed by its own worshipped pair. Then, turning to the right, resumed his march, and travelled streets and lanes with wondrous strength, until, on stooping through a narrow arch, we stood before a squalid house at length. He gazed, and whispered with a cold despair, here hope died, starved out in its utmost lair. When he had spoken thus, before he stirred. I spoke, perplexed by something in the signs of desolation I had seen and heard in this drear pilgrimage to ruined shrines. When faith and love and hope are dead indeed, can life still live? By what doth it proceed? As whom his one intense thought overpowers, he answered coldly, "Take a watch, erase the signs and figures of the circling hours, detach the hands, remove the dial face. The works proceed until run down, although bereft of purpose, void of use, still go." Then, turning to the right, paced on again, and traversed squares and travelled streets whose glooms seemed more and more familiar to my ken, and reached that sullen temple of the tombs, and paused to murmur with the old despair, "Here faith died, poisoned by this charnel air." I ceased to follow, for the knot of doubt was severed sharply with a cruel knife. He circled thus forever, tracing out the series of the fraction left of life, perpetual recurrence in the scope of but 3 terms: dead faith, dead love, dead hope. Although lamps burn along the silent streets, even when moonlight silvers empty squares, the dark holds countless lanes and close retreats. But when the night its fearless mantle wears, the open spaces yawn with gloom abysmal, the sombre mansions loom immense and dismal, the lanes are black as subterranean lairs. And soon the eye a strange new vision learns. The night remains for it as dark and dense, yet clearly in this darkness it discerns as in the daylight with its natural sense, perceives a shade in shadow not obscurely, pursues a stir of black in blackness surely, sees spectres also in the gloom intense. The ear, too, with the silence vast and deep, becomes familiar, though unreconciled, hears breathings as of hidden life asleep, and muffled throbs as of pent passions wild, far murmurs, speech of pity or derision, but all more dubious than the things of vision, so that it knows not when it is beguiled. No time abates the first despair and awe, but wonder ceases soon. The weirdest thing is felt least strange beneath the lawless law, where death in life is the eternal king. Crushed impotent beneath this reign of terror, dazed with such mysteries of woe and error, the soul is too outworn for wondering. He stood alone within the spacious square, declaiming from the central grassy mound, with head uncovered and with streaming hair, as if large multitudes were gathered round. A stalwart shape, the gestures full of might, the glances burning with unnatural light. As I came through the desert, thus it was as I came through the desert. All was black, in heaven no single star, on earth no track. A brooding hush without a stir or note, the air so thick it clotted in my throat. And thus for hours, then some enormous things swooped past with savage cries and clanking wings. But I strode on austere, no hope, could have no fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. Eyes of fire glared at me, throbbing with a starved desire. The hoarse and heavy and carnivorous breath was hot upon me from deep jaws of death. Sharp claws, swift talons, fleshless fingers cold, plucked at me from the bushes, tried to hold. But I strode on austere, no hope, could have no fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. Lo you there, that hillock burning with a brazen glare, those myriad dusky flames with points aglow, which writhed and hissed and darted to and fro. A Sabbath of the serpents, heaped pell-mell for devil's roll call and some fate of hell. Yet I strode on austere, no hope, could have no fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. Meteors ran and crossed their javelins on the black sky span. The zenith opened to a gulf of flame. The dreadful thunderbolts jarred earth's fixed frame. The ground all heaved in waves of fire that surged and weltered round me, soul there unsubmerged. Yet I strode on austere, no hope, could have no fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. From the right, a shape came slowly with a ruddy light, a woman with a red lamp in her hand, bareheaded and barefooted on that strand. O desolation moving with such grace, O anguish with such beauty in thy face, I fell as on my bier, hope travailed with such fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. I was twain, two selves distinct that cannot join again. One stood apart and knew, but could not stir, and watched the other stark in swoon and her. And she came on, and never turned aside, between such sun and moon and roaring tide, and as she came more near, my soul grew mad with fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. Hell is mild and piteous, matched with that accursed wild. A large black sign was on her breast that bowed a broad black band ran down her snow-white shroud. That lamp she held was her own burning heart, whose blood drops trickled step by step apart. The mystery was clear. Mad rage had swallowed fear. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. By the sea she knelt and bent above that senseless me. Those lamp drops fell upon my white brow there. She tried to cleanse them with her tears and hair. She murmured words of pity, love, and woe. She heeded not the level rushing flow. And mad with rage and fear I stood stone-bound, so near. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert. When the tide swept up to her, there kneeling by my side, she clasped that corpse like me, and they were borne away, and this vile me was left forlorn. I know the whole sea cannot quench that heart, or cleanse that brow, or wash those two apart. They love, their doom is drear, yet they nor hope nor fear. But I, what do I here? How he arrives there, none can clearly know. Athwart the mountains and immense wild tracts, or flung away upon that vast sea-flow, or down the river's boiling cataracts. To reach it is as dying fever-stricken. To leave it, slow, faint birth, intense pangs quicken, and memory swoons in both the tragic acts. But being there, one feels a citizen. Escape seems hopeless to the heart forlorn. Can death in life be brought to life again? And yet release does come. There comes a morn when he awakes from slumbering so sweetly that all the world is changed for him completely, and he is verily as if new-born. He scarcely can believe the blissful change. He weeps, perchance, who wept not while accursed. Never again will he approach the range infected by that evil spell now burst. Poor wretch, who once hath paced that dolent city, shall pace it often, doomed beyond all pity, with horror ever deepening from the first. Some say that phantoms haunt those shadowy streets, and mingle freely there with sparse mankind, and tell of ancient woes and black defeats, and murmur mysteries in the grave enshrined. But others think them visions of illusion, or even men gone far in self-confusion, no man there being wholly sane in mind. And yet a man who raves, however mad, who bares his heart and tells of his own fall, reserves some inmost secret, good or bad. The phantoms have no reticence at all. The nudity of flesh will blush, though tameless. The extreme nudity of bone grins shameless. The unsexed skeleton mocks shroud and pall. I have seen phantoms there that wear as men, and men that wear as phantoms flit and roam, marked shapes that were not living to my ken, caught breathings acrid as with Dead Sea foam. The city rests for man so weird and awful that his intrusion there might seem unlawful, and phantoms there may have their proper home. The mansion stood apart in its own ground. In front thereof a fragrant garden lawn, high trees about it, and the whole walled round. The massy iron gates were both withdrawn, and every window of its front shed light, portentous in that city of the night. But though thus lighted, it was deadly still, as all the countless bulks of solid gloom. Perchance a congregation to fulfil solemnities of silence in this doom, mysterious rites of dolour and despair, permitting not a breath of chant or prayer. Broad steps ascended to a terrace broad, whereon lay still light from the open door. The hall was noble, and its aspect awed, hung round with heavy black from dome to floor, and ample stairways rose to left and right, whose balustrades were also draped with night. I paced from room to room, from hall to hall, nor any life throughout the maze discerned, but each was hung with its funereal pall, and held a shrine, around which tapers burned, with picture or with statue or with bust, all copied from the same fair form of dust. A woman very young and very fair, beloved by bounteous life and joy and youth, and loving these sweet lovers, so that care and age and death seemed not for her in sooth. Alike as stars, all beautiful and bright, these shapes lit up that mausolean night. At length I heard a murmur as of lips, and reached an open oratory hung with heaviest blackness of the whole eclipse. Beneath the dome a fuming censer swung, and one lay there upon a low white bed, with tapers burning at the foot and head. The Lady of the Images, supine, death-still, life-sweet, with folded palms she lay, and kneeling there, as at a sacred shrine, a young man, wan and worn, who seemed to pray. A crucifix of dim and ghostly white surmounted the large altar left in night. The chambers of the mansion of my heart, in every one whereof thine image dwells, are black with grief eternal for thy sake. The inmost oratory of my soul, wherein thou ever dwellest quick or dead, is black with grief eternal for thy sake. I kneel beside thee, and I clasp the cross, with eyes forever fixed upon that face, so beautiful and dreadful in its calm. I kneel here patient as thou liest there, as patient as a statue carved in stone of adoration and eternal grief. While thou dost not awake, I cannot move, and something tells me thou wilt never wake, and I alive feel turning into stone. Most beautiful were death to end my grief, most hateful to destroy the sight of thee, dear vision better than all death or life. But I renounce all choice of life or death, for either shall be ever at thy side, and thus in bliss or woe be ever well. He murmured thus and thus in monotone, intent upon that uncorrupted face, entranced except his moving lips alone. I glided with hushed footsteps from the place. This was the festival that filled with light that palace in the city of the night. Anear the centre of that northern crest stands out a level upland, bleak and bare, from which the city, east and south and west, sinks gently in long waves. And throned there an image sits, stupendous, superhuman, the bronze colossus of a winged woman upon a graded granite base foursquare. Low seated, she leans forward massively, with cheek on clenched left hand, the forearm's might erect, its elbow on her rounded knee. Across a clasped book in her lap, the right upholds a pair of compasses. She gazes with full-set eyes, but wandering in thick mazes of sombre thought, beholds no outward sight. Words cannot picture her, but all men know that solemn sketch the pure sad artist wrought 3 centuries and 60 years ago, with fantasies of his peculiar thought. The instruments of carpentry and science scattered about her feet in strange alliance with the keen wolfhound sleeping and distraught. Scales, hourglass, bell, and magic square above, the grave and solid infant perched beside, with open winglets that might bear a dove, intent upon its tablets, heavy-eyed. Her folded wings as of a mighty eagle, but all too impotent to lift the regal robustness of her earth-born strength and pride. And with those wings and that light wreath which seems to mock her grand head, and the knotted frown of forehead charged with baleful thoughts and dreams, the household bunch of keys, the housewife's gown, voluminous, indented, and yet rigid, as if a shell of burnished metal frigid, the feet thick shod, to tread all weakness down. The comet hanging o'er the waste dark seas, the massy rainbow curved in front of it, beyond the village with the masts and trees, the snaky imp, dog-headed from the pit, bearing upon its bat-like leathern pinions her name unfolded in the sun's dominions, the melancholia that transcends all wit. Thus has the artist copied her, and thus surrounded to expound her form sublime, her fate heroic and calamitous, fronting the dreadful mysteries of time, unvanquished in defeat and desolation, undaunted in the hopeless conflagration of the day setting on her baffled prime. Baffled and beaten, back she works on still, weary and sick of soul she works the more, sustained by her indomitable will. The hands shall fashion and the brain shall pour, and all her sorrow shall be turned to labour, till death, the friend-foe, piercing with his sabre that mighty heart of hearts, ends bitter war. But as if blacker night could dawn on night, with tenfold gloom on moonless night unstarred, a sense more tragic than defeat and blight, more desperate than strife with hope debarred, more fatal than the adamantine never, encompassing her passionate endeavour, dawns glooming in her tenebrous regard. The sense that every struggle brings defeat, because fate holds no prize to crown success, that all the oracles are dumb or cheat because they have no secret to express, that none can pierce the vast black veil uncertain because there is no light beyond the curtain, that all is vanity and nothingness. Titanic from her high throne in the north, that city's sombre patroness and queen, in bronze sublimity she gazes forth over her capital of Teen and Threen, over the river with its isles and bridges, the marsh and moorland, to the stern rock ridges confronting them with a coeval mien. The moving moon and stars from east to west circle before her in the sea of air. Shadows and gleams glide round her solemn rest. Her subjects often gaze up to her there. The strong to drink new strength of iron endurance, the weak new terrors, all renewed assurance and confirmation of the old despair.